Hello and welcome to Philosophy Dialogues. My name is Dylan Norman, and today I'm lucky enough to be joined by Patrick Clark. He's been an advisor for much of Philosophy Dialogues, and he's been an instrumental part in the development of the series. Thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Clark.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess to get started, I know I provided a little bit of an introduction, but could you provide a bit more of an introduction to like who you are and what you've done, I guess?
Sure. I'm a teacher and a writer. I've had a very diverse work experience. I worked in construction. I was a radio and club disc jockey. I was a musician. I was a writer. I was a teacher, a department chair, and a manager. I worked at NASA as a technical writer. So I've worked in public, private, for-profit, nonprofit, government, small group, large group, just very diverse work experience. Some people are actually good at something and they work at that their whole lives. Yeah, me, not so much.
I know you've also done a lot of work in like debate and also in discussion work. So could you give me a bit more of background on that as well?
Sure. So in terms of debate, I was interested in argument and debate very young. Many of the teachers that I had in elementary and middle school were quite fond of discussion and debate and participation. And so I sort of had that kind of thing in my educational experience. And then I was involved in coaching students for debate when I was a teacher. And my brother founded a debate league that I've been a community judge for a number of years. And let's see, last, I guess, working also just trying to settle disputes as a manager, quote unquote.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about it. I never did debate like in a league as a young person. I never had that experience, but I've certainly been on the other side, both as a judge and a coach.
It was interesting. You mentioned you were a manager who had to deal with disputes. I was wondering, like, could you recount some times where you successfully went about dealing with disputes, and how did you do that as a manager?
Yeah, so it's a different workplace environment now, but when I was managing teams of instructors, in one particular situation, we had a really good creative dispute about how to teach English classes.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going through regional accreditation, what's called regional accreditation at the time. And so it was really important that we have all our ducks in a row and all of our methodology and assumptions and all those kinds of things documented, as one does when one's trying to achieve, educational recertification or accreditation. So it led to something like a 3-month-long argument among these teachers about how to teach something. And some people were diehard, listen, I don't believe in tests, but you got to have tests every once in a while to measure progress. And other people were like, no, that's meaningless. It's all about writing and speaking and reading and listening. And so we were able to get a group of teachers to agree, here are 3 valid ways to teach this one particular course and meet all the objectives. So we guarantee anybody who teaches this course and follows, the curriculum as laid out, will be able to tailor it to their particular teaching style, and yet guarantee that even though they're not teaching it like, say, the teacher who teaches it in the morning, it's a different style. We can guarantee that at least all the students who go through this course will all achieve the same minimum level objectives. So I'm most proud of that because that took months and people were very passionate, very committed to their particular vision and had good reasons. And I think what happened is once we all agreed to talk it through and not rush to judgment and not close our minds, but rather observe and see that different students could, in fact, achieve a goal in more than one way. and teachers could achieve a performance goal for a student in more than one way. It opened everybody's minds. But it got quite contentious there, although respectful. It got contentious a little bit, but ultimately, I think we all were pretty happy with it, and we all certainly were proud to have gone through that experience together. However, that's kind of an exception. That's one of the few things that I look back as an achievement in my career, because obviously we know from our personal lives and our professional lives that disputes don't always end that well. In fact, that's kind of the norm, sadly,
Yeah.
especially lately. So
I guess like if you remember, like what was the difference between that argument and why it resolved in a better way compared to like other arguments you've had?
I think with anything that involves, and this is, to be clear, a group of 12 or 15 people.
Mm.
And I'm one of the people in the group. I'm also a teacher. I happen to be dean, but I'm also teaching a section myself. I'm also an English teacher myself. So I have an opinion as a teacher, but I'm also supposed to, sit atop this discussion and preside over it as an administrator. And again, it's a different work environment now. This was, 15, 20 years ago. But I think there were several key factors. One, the overarching umbrella organization that we were working for was willing to let us go through this. The teachers were compensated for their time. They were paid at a training rate every time we met on this issue over the course of those 3 months. Everybody got a little something, at least. They weren't paid per hour the same they would be for teaching. But they got something. It was an acknowledgement that we recognize this is an ongoing thing that takes away from your time. And as a part-time instructor, we shouldn't ask for your time for free. And I think people appreciated that. It was, I went to them and I told them the truth. I said, I can't get you what I'd like to get you, but we can get at least this concession. The organization is backing this. The organization is going to commit to us for as long as it takes to solve this problem. That helped a lot. I think everybody saw, that this doesn't have to be something that we settle today, which is a big reason why I think people get passionate sometimes in discussions, is because they perceive it as a all or nothing right now, or you'll lose it forever kind of moment.
Yeah.
And I think as soon as it became clear, no, this is ongoing. This is not going to be settled today. It's going to involve several steps. It's going to involve gathering data, observation, discussion, evaluation. All of those steps are going to require us to be both passionate and committed to our position, but also open-minded and flexible and willing to acknowledge what works for people. We have to acknowledge when we're in a minority, and we have to acknowledge when we're in the majority and we agree with a group of people. We have to see that from the beginning. So it helped that we were all professional adults and could see the relevance and the merit of some of those starting assumptions, right? But yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that's kind of an ideal situation. That's one of the reasons why it worked. It was kind of an ideal situation. Everybody granted this is critical. Everybody granted all of the entry assumptions need to be examined. Everybody granted this is going to take time. Everybody granted we're not going to solve it today, and that we have to come with something that works for everybody. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you can get everybody to agree to that, then you too can solve a problem in months and months.
Optimistic words, but I guess like one thing that was really interesting from that I don't hear talked about often is valuing people's time in a discussion. Because like I know in most debates you'll have, like, at least in the world, they're kind of spontaneous, but for those longer ones, as you pointed out, valuing people's time in some way, yours was monetary compensation, but like some way is really valuable, I guess.
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's an unfortunate nature of a lot of debates today, whether they're sort of snarky little Twitter, flare-ups or something, or on social media, where I think people turn to sarcasm. I mean, maybe sooner than people would in the past. I guess it's an eagerness to kind of dunk on somebody, but also what the flip side of that is an acknowledgement that maybe this kind of cheap, shallow victory of dunking on somebody is the only victory I'm going to get, because no one's going to sustain this for more than a few minutes, right?
Mm.
Or a week, or a month, or whatever the latest controversy and flare up is. It seems almost tacit and unspoken now that nobody expects that to go on for a long time. Everyone expects it to kind of be a short discussion, which is interesting,
Yeah.
because aren't we saying out loud, this is not serious? Aren't we saying out loud, this is by definition short term? Well, then why are we so upset, right?
Mm.
You can't have it both ways. If it's small potatoes, why is everybody upset? If it's large potatoes, why is everybody in a rush, right?
Yeah.
We seem to have forgotten like just really basic fundamental things about how to talk to each other.
Yeah, I mean, you're right though. On an unconscious level, I guess we recognize that a lot of the things we're so passionate about in like that month or that week is gonna blow over, and it doesn't matter that much. So yeah,
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I suppose at that point it's more just arguing for I don't know, the distraction. Like, what do you
Something.
think? I guess.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge one of the reasons why you said acknowledge everyone's time.
Hmm.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge everyone's emotional expenditure. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a burden to talk to people at length at times today.
Yeah.
I one of the reasons why I want to try to be more open-minded is because I know what it feels like to go through that, when you can just tell it's not gonna, this person isn't going to change their mind, and in fact you're losing ground. um, you know that feeling, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that, and that is really exhausting. It really is. I don't want to be exhausting to other people.
Mhm. Yeah.
um, so anyway.
I know we talked a bit about like what went well in that uh, discussion, but you also mentioned that there was a lot of times it didn't go well. So I guess could you give me an example of when didn't go well, and what you learned from that?
For myself, I look back on a couple of things I said maybe a few years ago, whether online or in person, and I kind of cringe a little bit, because I could see how frustrated I might have been, or how quick to abandon any kind of restraint or objectivity I was. Um, so I'm deploring certain things in communication these days that I myself have been guilty of. So I guess rushing to judgment, um, you know, not expressing much hope in the other person to listen to reason, assuming the other person is closed-minded, those kinds of things are when I failed. Those tendencies in me, I don't think I'm the only one, but I can certainly see them quite clearly in myself. The tendency to sort of dismiss the other person and not be as respectful. So I feel like, since I can see that in myself, I better cut others some slack, right? When they exhibit that towards me, I need to be a little bit bigger and not stoop to that or fall to that. I'm working on that. I think I've gotten a lot better at that. I don't have any recent success stories in terms of how the discussion went, but I do have success stories in terms of I don't let myself get bent out of shape by anything I hear or see anymore. I've gotten much better at that. That's something. I'll take that. That's amazing.
I was just gonna say, you mentioned that you look back and cringe on some things you said like a couple years ago. I was just wondering like how you've managed to, I guess, learn and grow a little bit to not get so out of control, I guess, in arguments.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say searching my social media is in fact fruitless. I've deleted it. No, so no, I'm sorry. What was the question?
Oh no, I was just you mentioned you were looking back and cringing at some things you'd said in like a couple years ago. I was just wondering how you've changed since then to get less emotionally invested in arguments?
Well, the shame helped. The sting of the shame I found was quite instructive and powerful in terms of a reminder to not make that mistake. I find like if you're going to make a mistake, it's really good to send it. It's really good to commit, because later when you see that, you're kind of like, so don't do anything, with less than full enthusiasm. Your mistakes will be a lot more instructive if you really fail spectacularly. I'm not sure if that's a model for others, but it seems to work for me. I'm able to learn more when I fail spectacularly. So,
yeah, I think well, it's the old saying failure is the best teacher, I guess.
yeah, and we should all not take ourselves quite so seriously. I think I've gotten a lot better at that, not taking myself so seriously. Yeah.
And what do you do if you find yourself getting upset? Like, I know you mentioned just then, like not taking yourself so seriously. But is there other ways you've found over the years?
For me, I can't necessarily say that I advocate this for others, but for me, the realization that politics is always going to be less important to me than friends and family. Um, I feel like that might be a minority position, perhaps, or less of a majority than it used to be, perhaps. So I don't know if that's controversial or not, but just reminding myself of that explicitly, that winning, quote unquote, an argument, especially a political argument, is never going to be as important to me as other lasting things, in my life that are resources, right? That helps a lot. And then again, the realization that some things are emotionally, if you'll pardon this phrase in 2022, trumped up more than they should be, perhaps in terms of significance. But again, that dichotomy that if it's a serious problem, then we shouldn't expect we're going to solve it overnight. If it's not a serious problem, why are we so upset? Right? We can't have it both ways. So I think the combination of those two things, realization of big problems take time, no point getting upset. And then being upset is often, itself a detriment. It prevents you from looking at something as clearly. It prevents you from, being as open-minded. And again, a big reason for a rational reason for strong emotion would be the pressure of some kind of deadline, right? Like if it's an imminent crisis and we have to solve it now or there are serious consequences, well, then everybody being upset makes perfect sense. It still doesn't necessarily help that everyone's upset. We still have to somehow overcome that, but at least the upsetness is rational. But when it's an ongoing thing that has existed for a long time, nobody should expect this to be solved overnight. Then the upsetness, I think, begins to look a little more objectionable. Now, people say, well, how can we not get upset about things that involve our core values? I totally understand that. I get that. But again, at the same time, if they involve our core values and they're ongoing, isn't that an argument for our very best analysis and discussion? Isn't that itself an argument that we all need to be on our A game and in control of our emotions and work together to solve it? Isn't that itself self-evident? Right? If it's involving core values and if it's an ongoing long-term thing, I can't make a better argument than that we all need to calm down and be a little bit more open-minded and patient and a little more willing to change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, just to go back to something you said earlier, about like discussions at the dinner table, you're absolutely right. Like if it's a big ongoing issue, you're not going to solve that over family dinner. And if it's one of those smaller issues that we talked about earlier, then it's transient. It doesn't matter in the long term. Like it's a culture war issue probably. So yeah, either way, you're absolutely right. It's not worth valuing over a family connection or just a connection in general.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising itself the number of issues that are apparently apocalyptic simultaneously. Simultaneously,
Hmm.
like one would assume the Earth is going to vanish next week. By the urgency of many of our current political discussions, one would assume that again, there's going to be some kind of cataclysmic apocalyptic event like tomorrow or something. And yet here we are week after week after week. The apocalypse is not, Y2K or whatever the latest, doomsday scenario is, apparently hasn't happened. So maybe we can all just calm down. I don't know. Just
Yeah.
thinking out loud.
I mean, speaking as a teen and like an age of like a lot of social media hype and all that, I know personally, it's very, very easy to get caught up in the issue of the day. But as I've grown a little older, I've had to be able to recognize like, okay, this is a big long-term issue that's worth studying. Like, this is worth being interested in. And then there's some transient issues of the day where it's like, or of the week where it's like, okay, I can kind of ignore this. I can take part a little bit, enjoy it, but don't get passionate about it. It's not worth it. So yeah.
Or yeah, get passionate about it, but not let's let the passion inform our reason, not obstruct it.
Hmm.
um that's the goal. Doing that, yeah, I get it's a challenge, but yeah, I just feel like young people in particular, it's funny because a while ago, one of the reasons I was so pessimistic and prone to, this is a couple of years ago, prone to see the worst in certain situations, is because as a teacher, I felt this is so, our current society, that our dialogue is so shallow and so dystopian. I felt worst for young people. And then I realized that young people actually kind of have something that we older folks don't, which is um, confronting this situation by definition without a long-term experience. If you're a young person, by definition, you don't have the benefit of decades of looking at a particular thing,
Hmm.
right? And so it's in some ways for many young people, it's automatically less dire, perhaps, than it is for for um, for people who have more years on them. I'm not sure if that's something that helps. I'm not sure, but it is interesting. I find that young people are actually, I have a lot of hope. The more time I spend around young people as a teacher, the more I'm impressed by their mental flexibility, their ability to look at things from a perspective that would not occur to an adult. And often young people are quite passionate, quite willing to embrace change, where not to over, stigmatize or over stereotype, but often older people are older mentally as well. They're perhaps a little bit more stuck in their ways, a little bit more committed to certain core values in a bad way. Commitment is good to values, but commitment to values in a not unreasonable way, or a unwilling and inflexibility, that's not necessarily good. So I think young people, I think it, obviously, for some of the problems that we're facing in our society, it does seem reasonable to posit that it's going to take teamwork. It's going to take a concerted effort to solve them. And in that case, it's going to be everyone working together, or so I dearly hope. I believe that people can do that. We've demonstrated many times in history. I believe that we can still do that. And that'll be old and young people working together, people of all different kinds working together. I certainly hope so.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do hope so too. Like, I hope for a future world where it's like there's a better connection. Um, I, Not to like switch tacks completely, but in that world where there's, um, I don't know, a better like working between ages, like where would you see the need for better discussion? in that most needed, I suppose?
I'd like to think that better discussion would be a big part of the reason why that world would be better in the first place.
Okay, yeah.
Um, I think there's a cause and effect relationship there.
Mhm.
I really do. I think that in my own personal experience over the past couple of years, I'd say my outlook on life went from pretty grim, pretty dark there for a while to much more hopeful and optimistic now. I don't think I'm the only one. I'm talking, of course, about lockdown and all of that. Everybody went through it. It was a sort of global event that I think we're still processing. And I don't want to say too much about that, but I do think that I wasn't the only one to go through a kind of a reevaluation of many fundamental things in my life. I assume many people did.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think that if there's going to be a better society in the future, that discussion, the way we're talking to each other, is going to be a big part of that. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. I was wondering though, like, how do you see that? Like, you obviously developed a lot of debate and discussion skills over your life. Like, in your personal life, how would those better discussion skills apply for you?
Well, I'm still figuring that out. I so far it seems to be again a mix of not taking myself quite so seriously, not feeling like I have to win or convince someone. You know, first of all, I don't. I mean, who wants to feel like every discussion you get into that the person you're talking with wants to change you in some way? Like that feels a little alarming to engage in every discussion like that. Like every discussion is about whether or not I or the other person is going to change. Like already that seems like a little higher stakes than I want every day.
Yeah.
And maybe that's maybe that's not good. Maybe that's an anti-activist attitude. Maybe I should embrace every day, not only willing to change, but hopefully to try to make others change. Okay, some of that I agree, but let's be honest, it's a bit much sometimes to think like every single discussion with every person is potentially life changing. So
Mm.
you know that's a lot of pressure. I'm not sure I want that pressure. I'm not sure others want to have that pressure.
Yeah, it
Um,
makes like every discussion so stressful. And I guess that like what adds to some of like the I guess the passion, because like the stakes are so high in every discussion. Like, how can you not care about it?
yeah, nobody wants to be guilty of abandoning their values. That's never praise, right?
Mhm.
Oh, you're so flexible, so flexible that you completely reversed your position on like four or five key planks of your platform. Like that's that's rarely seen as a good thing. Of
Mm.
course, we have to be able to admit when we make mistakes. That's why I think we'll know when we're in that kind of society, the kind of society that we're talking about, where more people feel comfortable saying, yes, I had an opinion 5 years ago. I was wrong. Next. But that's usually not how things go. Usually people are pilloried for having certain positions that have become, unpopular instead of just facing that head on, showing that they're being a model of being willing to admit you've made a mistake. This is utterly politically naive to say this right now. People should just admit they made mistakes. Like any politician in purple states right now is listening to this. Like, does anybody have any more eye rolls? I'm all out of eye rolls, right? Like that's not. Let's just be honest. That's politically like you can't do that these days. You can't flip flop.
Mhm.
Unless you're in an extremely powerful position. You really can't flip flop, politically. Well, okay, I rest my case. That's how I know we're not there yet, right? We should be able to admit when we're wrong, and that shouldn't be as big a weapon as it is. To assume that people are going to hold positions for their entire lives as though experience doesn't matter. In other words, as though we get all the information at the beginning, that information doesn't change over 40 or 50 years. We don't learn new information. The world doesn't change. Everything stays the same, so that we can say proudly 50 years later, I never changed my mind. That seems like a ridiculous world. Like, are you serious? Like, if you look at all of the things that people are currently on fire about politically, these are things that people have talked about for a long time. Certainly most of my lifetime. There's very few issues that are really relatively recent. There's only one or two actually that I can think of that are recent. And even those are kind of extensions of older ongoing debates, and many involving, various forms of civil rights, debates about politics, all those kinds of things. These have been raging. I'm almost 60 years old, and these have been raging in one way or another for my entire life, right? It's just that the intensity, the meanness, and the divisiveness of those debates seems to have increased, perhaps, or perhaps it's just the prevalence of social media that it seems like they've increased. That's, I guess, part of the debate, right? Every debate itself is about facts, right? Debates about values are often turned into debates about facts as well. I get that, but I'm just saying we seem to have lost our perspective on how long and how fractious some of these debates are. That's my personal opinion. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. Yeah, for sure. I'm just going back to something you said earlier about how it's like flip-flopping is less okay, I guess. I know personally, like my views from when I was maybe 15 and living in Virginia are completely different from my views now. I've basically changed on pretty much every issue I can think of. But I was lucky because, well, actually, I'm not sure. I've always been curious because I was never very much on social media at that time. I never really voiced any views there. So I got to change my views kind of in my own little bubble. And so when I came out of that bubble, I had like a more refined view set. So I always wonder, like, is there a pressure if you're on social media and you've already voiced a lot of opinions about something? Like, would that push you to stay with those opinions, or like, I guess, what's your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. As an older person of a particular generation, I guess it's hard to tell whether or not my experience is different or typical yet. So I grew up with, I'm the first generation that had computers, right? So I definitely grew up with tech, but I can't say that time spent living with tech was anything like the first 10 years of a typical 20-year-old's life, for example, right? I wouldn't say that I'm as familiar or comfortable perhaps with tech as many young people natively, naturally are, okay? So my experience with social media might not be what their experience is like now. So for example, I've never been on Twitter. I'm not on TikTok. I'm not on Twitch. I'm not on a lot of, I'm not on Signal. I'm not on a lot of social media platforms or apps that perhaps younger people would use. So what I see may not be what many people your generation are seeing. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I would say that I do see, say something like Facebook memories, for example. Occasionally I'll see someone post something from their Facebook memories and say, like with a joke, like, guess I was wrong about that, right? Or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see that very often. I don't know whether or not that kind of flip-flop is typical and people just aren't admitting it. So in other words, is the norm that most people have changed from 5 or 10 years ago, but only a few of those are saying it online and saying, look at how I used to be. I'm different now. I just don't know. I don't see that post very often, that kind of post very often.
Yeah, I mean, I know in conversation I'm pretty open about like how much my views have changed, but I don't go on social media personally and be like, "Hey guys, look at what I used to believe."
Right.
So yeah, it's interesting.
And also I don't in my case, I'm not sure that my position on a lot of big issues has really changed all that much. It's more it's more a change in my perspective on the position.
Hmm.
I'd like to think that I'm more knowledgeable about the opposing side and more open-minded. Perhaps I could say that I've studied my reasons for my position a little bit differently rather than just sort of instinctively clinging to them. I've examined them in some cases. Um, so I guess I've changed. Is you know I, maybe that's what's supposed to happen. Maybe that's the benefit. Maybe that's what experience is, right? Maybe experience has a a beneficial effect that you can look back and kind of review your thinking a little bit. And even if the conclusion ends up being the same, you still have an increased awareness of why you believe something, right? So I don't know. I'm trying to I'm trying to define what, in answer to your question, I guess I feel like social media goes through faster cycles than it did when I first got on Facebook. Everything seems to be a blizzard for no more than a week or two.
Hmm. Yeah.
Everything's short term, very intense, but short term. And then we're on to another short term apocalypse of some kind. That's what it feels like. I often don't participate as much as I used to. I'm not necessarily making comments and liking other people's comments. If anything, I probably spend a lot less time on social media than I did perhaps 5, 6 years ago. I used to post quite a few times in a particular day, and now I might not post even in a week. Yeah, I don't know if my experience is typical or not. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but I'm trying to get an idea about what that social media part of that phenomenon is. It's new. It's not like we know what this is going to look like 30 years from now or even 10.
Mhm.
I think the whole thing about social media is going to be looked at differently in 10 or even 15 years, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. And unfortunately, we are running a bit out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time and your ideas. It's been great to talk.
Likewise, thank you so much. Yeah, congrats on the channel. Keep putting out great stuff.
Yeah, and thank you so much for all your help. If you guys want to check out the first Philosophy Dialogue series where it's just between me and a peer, a lot of those ideas, I had a lot of help with their development from Mr. Clark here. So you have him to thank for a lot of the reasons why that series is the way it is.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Couldn't be more proud. You're killing it.
Thank
Keep
you. I
going.
appreciate it. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on, Mr. Clark. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as always, you can check out the rest of the videos on the channel. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.